Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to spotlight 5 houseplants that perhaps you've never heard of before. So my goal for today's video is to simply introduce you to some lesser known houseplants. And these plants are like the good type of lesser known that are so little known that they're like actually inexpensive. The only thing is that they are also so little known that I don't think you would find any of these 5 in your local houseplant stores. At least I would be very surprised. However, I do feel confident that all 5 of these are ones that are readily available enough on the internet for a decent price. So the first one I want to talk about today is this really lovely houseplant. I absolutely adore this one. So this right here is a Drymonia CHIRIBOGANA, I think it's pronounced. I'm getting rusty on my plant names these days, but I absolutely love the way this looks. It's a little wonky as it's been getting used to my home. It has this one large leaf, yet all the other ones have come in like 1/5 of the size of this one, so it's still figuring out what it's doing, but I just absolutely love the venation on this plant, and I just think it's so interesting specifically because it's a gesneriad. That means it's in the same family as plants like African violets, lipstick plants, epicias, some really incredible houseplants. But this one's just so different. I really love the venation on this plant, and it has some really thick, leathery leaves that you wouldn't really expect. Of course, like many other gesneriads, this plant is known for flowering, but I would say that I couldn't give a rat's ass about the flowers. Maybe they're beautiful. I haven't seen them yet. I haven't even Google searched them because all I care about is these lovely leaves. This one right here is like my pride and joy on this plant. I'm sure one day it will get acclimated. Maybe this one looks like it's gonna be a nice sizable leaf, but these leaves are just really, really stunning. It's a plant that I hadn't really heard of before. I'm pretty sure I got this on Steve's Leaves. I saw that they had it available and it seemed like a really interesting one to try out, and I'm very thrilled that I did. It was very inexpensive. I think it was like $20 maximum, which for a more out there collector houseplant is a very, very good deal. I'm sure we can all agree on that. I think I'm more fascinated by the fact that it's a gesneriad in that family of so many incredible flowering houseplants, but this foliage is just so different. It's like an outlier compared to many of those. So I really, really enjoy that. It's been extremely easy for me to take care of. Like I said, the leaves are coming in a little inconsistent, so I'm sure I'm doing something that I could change, but it's been a very reliable houseplant that I just go ahead and water roughly once a week. It's been hanging out on the shelf behind me underneath the grow lights, and it's been doing a really excellent job. I've really enjoyed watching it grow. And I haven't propagated this yet, but from the way that it looks with its very thick stem, it looks like one that would root up pretty easily in water. I will have to experiment or do some research. Probably should do some research before I just go ahead and chop this plant up, but it's just so gorgeous. This is one that I could just obsess over for a long time because these leaves are just totally my vibe. And like I was saying, it's one that I just feel like most people probably haven't really heard of unless they're into collecting gesneriads, which I know not that many people are right now. So definitely one worth looking into if you've never heard of it before for this foliage alone. It's just so stunning. Another one that's got some really stunning foliage. This one's gonna be in a glass cloche today. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to take it out because you can see the way it's kind of rooting around the glass here. So this is a Peperomia. I wanna say Tingo Maria. It might be Tinga Maria. I'll put the correct name on screen, but this one has some really gorgeous leaves on it. I hope that the glass is clear enough. It's a little dusty, I guess, but hopefully you can see through it, these leaves, which are really, really nice and fuzzy, but they also have this really nice pattern on them, which I really appreciate. Of course, it's a Peperomia, and I'm a collector of Peperomias, so maybe I have a little bit of a soft spot for a nice, interesting Peperomia, but as many of you may know, with Peperomias becoming a little bit more popular, there are so many varieties of peperomias that exist. I believe there's over 1,500 species. So there are plenty out there for you to collect. However, there's a finite amount that are on the market. I'd say there's probably like between 50 and 100 ones that are readily available. Of course, a large percentage of those are ones that you'd have to dig for on the internet because many of them are more collector varieties, including this one right here, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. But it's also been a very reliable grower for me. I don't think it would be flourishing the way it is if it wasn't inside this glass cloche, as many of the more collector peperomias are known for requiring that rainforest tropical setting, so that's why I'm trying to replicate that while having it inside this glass close right here, kind of as a terrarium, but it's inside a planter that I actually made myself. And it's clearly been taking to this setting from the way it's just been growing all around the container, and like I said, it's rooting along the glass. You can kind of see back here and all along the front too. The roots, or the aerial roots of this plant, are grabbing onto the moisture on the glass as it's growing along, which is totally fine. It just means it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get in there and water it when I do, which is not very often, because these plants, when they're kept in an environment like this, practically take care of themselves, which baffles me. I don't understand the science behind it, because if this peperomia was sitting as wet as it is outside of this container, this thing would rot in an instant, but I don't know, it really seems to be taking this environment. Of course, you can see the leaves in comparison to the ones that are a little bit more older are coming in much smaller, but I really don't mind that because they still have that same leaf pattern and color and all of the characteristics that it has that I'm so head over heels for. So it's really such an interesting plant. Perhaps I should go in there and give it some fertilizer next time I get inside, because this thing has been living inside this glass container for like 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. I don't know exactly how long I've had this plant, but I think I've only let it breathe the air outside of this glass cloche like once or twice throughout the entirety of the time that I've had it, but it seems like that might be the secret to its success. It's really just this kind of monstrosity inside here. It's very, very interesting, and it's a really, really cool houseplant that I think so many more people should be growing, but it's definitely not one that is something you'd find in your houseplant stores. But like I said, it's certainly one that would be rather inexpensive if you were to look for this online, as it is a peperomia, and so many peperomias are very, very inexpensive, which is one of the most amazing things about them, but there are, of course, so many more things to love. Another houseplant that I got from Steve's Leaves, I believe, is this Pilea grandifolia right here. I think when most of us think of Pileas, probably the first thing that comes to mind is the Pilea peperomioides, or the pancake plant, friendship plant, UFO plant, whatever you want to call it. But there are so many more Pileas than just that one. That one is a complete outlier from the rest. It's just so different in its appearance and overall growth structure in comparison to these Pileas that grow in a much more like bushy manner, and they're kind of little ways that they branch off one another. And there are a bunch of these that you will see at your local houseplant stores, like the aluminum plant, which is Pilea cateri, and there's plenty of other ones like the Pilea spruciana, which I think they call like the Norfolk Pilea. So many different varieties that you're probably most often going to find the terrarium selection at your houseplant store. But this is one that caught my eye on Steve's Leaves website when I was browsing a while back because of just how plain green it is. It almost looks like this is something you could eat. I wouldn't be surprised if you had this on your kitchen counter, if someone went to pick a leaf off this and try to smell it, but I don't think they would really smell anything other than just chlorophyll. But it's really such a gorgeous houseplant, and I know it's not the most striking, it's not the most showy foliage in comparison to the last two I was talking about, but that's my favorite thing about this houseplant. Of course, if you watch me, you know I'm a sucker for houseplants that look like weeds or that they're growing at a crack in the sidewalk, and this fits that to the T. These leaves alone literally just look very weedish. So that's really my obsession with this houseplant, and that's almost my assumption as to why this isn't one that you will find in your local houseplant stores, because it just is a little too weed-like and probably isn't one that stands out amongst the rest in comparison to these other Pileas that I was mentioning, as they do have nice leaf variegation and much more just character, let's say, to the leaves. But I just love a nice plain plant, and this is exactly what I'm looking for. And I've been thrilled to how easy this plant grows for me. I've grown so many different Pileas. I've grown the aluminum plant, the silver tree, the Norfolk, or whatever they call it, and I've actually killed all of those. I'm sure it was my fault, but this is the one for me that has just been plowing through everything, through all my neglect. This thing just always looks amazing. Of course, it's balded a little bit. If I turn it around, you can kind of see the lower section of the plant has lost a lot of its foliage, but I still think it looks fantastic the way it does now, and it gives it more character, as I always say, and I love a little character. And if I really want to, Pileas are incredibly easy to propagate, so I could just go around and cut all of these back and root them up in water, and I'm sure if I cared for this plant correctly, or maybe put a little glass cloche over it in the meantime, all of these branches down here would shoot new growth off again, and it would become a nice bushy plant again. So I really, really love this houseplant. This is one in particular that I think probably would not cost you any more than $10, $15 just because it just really probably isn't a plant that is exciting to many people except for people like me who just find the joy in these plain plants that almost look like you could eat them. So it's such a cool houseplant. I highly, highly recommend it if you're into any of these more plain bohemian sorts of houseplants. This is a really, really excellent one to grow. Moving on, I have two more to highlight today. So, ooh, this is another one from Steve's Leaves. They have some really interesting houseplants on there, as I always say. So, of course, I have a couple selections from them today. And this one right here is my Cissus ADENOPODA. And I know this might not look like much right now, but this is a houseplant that I've had for a couple of years now. It is a plant that goes dormant in the winter time typically. So usually this plant will get growing for me in the spring or maybe in the summertime, and then usually around the end of the year or the beginning of the year when it's the darkest and the coldest, this plant will usually start to defoliate a bit, die back, and then after a couple months, regrow again. And that's been the cycle that's been happening with my Cissus for the last couple of years. So it is a plant that you kind of have to pay a little bit more mind to. It might be bald for a month or two out of the year, and you might just have to deal with having a pot of sticks, but I don't really mind that because I just absolutely love all the character that this houseplant has. It is a Cissus, which is in the Vitaceae family, which is what grapes are in, if you're familiar with the way that grape plants look in a vineyard. So these leaves do have a lot of characteristics to grape plants, and you can kind of see too with these little tendrils or whatever they're called that are trying to grab on and spiral and grab onto whatever. These are some dried up ones back here that I had pulled off from its old setting recently. I did just repot this one a month or two ago so that I could use the old planter that this was in for a long time. But you can see right here actually that this new growth right here is already grabbed onto this bamboo stick right here that I just kind of stuck in. As this is a houseplant, as you can see with it wanting to grab onto stuff, that will really take to a situation where you let it climb up. In its old pot, it had these 3 leather straps. It was a hanging planter, and they would climb up the leather straps until they reached the top and they would start cascading down, and it was gorgeous. But this plant, like I said, does go dormant for a while, and I wanted to replace it with something that's going to be more full throughout the entirety of the year. But I think on a little trellis setting, this is one that I'll really, really get to enjoy throughout the year. But the thing I love most about this houseplant is the foliage, of course. It's got this lovely shape, like I said, like the grape leaf plant. I really like how it's got these little sections. But not only the leaf shape, I absolutely love the characteristics that these leaves have. They're very, very fuzzy. They're super soft, and I love fuzzy plants. But they also just have this overall, like, purplish hue to them. They have these veins that go throughout the leaves that are purple, and if I flip the plant around, I'm sure you can see kind of through the back side that it shows off a little bit more of its purple side through the back. So I really, really love that about this houseplant. I'm a sucker for plants that are green and purple because it's just such a beautiful combination, and a lot of plants are green. So anytime plants aren't completely green, it's admittedly very exciting to me. As much as I love my green houseplants like my Pilea grandifolia, there are some houseplants that sport a lot of color that are a little bit less like bohemian, like a Calathea, for example. They're much more showy, much more tropical. Well, this kind of fits that much more like weed growing out of the sidewalk kind of vibe, but still sports a little bit more color. So I absolutely love that about this. This is a very drought tolerant houseplant. I grow this in my east facing window. In my old apartment, I grew it in the west facing window for the entirety of the time that I had it. And it's one that I just let it go till it dries out completely. I go ahead and water it, and it's just a very set and forget kind of plant. I probably water it like every 7 to 10 days, keeping in mind, while it is drought tolerant, if I'm putting it in these bright windows, it does dry out pretty quickly as these roots do absorb water very fast. But it's just been a very reliable houseplant to grow. Like I said many times, you do have to be mindful of it going dormant. I don't want you to think if you purchase this plant and it dies back that you're killing it. You should hang on for it for a little while longer until the whole thing dies back if you are doing something terribly wrong. But this is a very reliable houseplant, a rather inexpensive houseplant, and it has a lot of character. So of course I recommend it today. Really one of my favorite houseplants. I'm sure in my past like top 10 houseplant videos I've done, I can guarantee you I've talked about this houseplant in the past because it's really one that has been one I've been really enjoying for a very long time. And the last one I want to talk about today, this is a really interesting one. So this, of course, is a Sansevieria, and I don't think this specimen right here is really going to be doing this any justice, but this is a Sansevieria PINGUICULA. I just blew out some perlite when I said that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Sansevieria PINGUICUla, but this is what they call the walking Sansevieria. I got enticed by this houseplant a couple years ago at the Philadelphia Flower Show, which I highly recommend checking out if you're ever in Philadelphia around the time. And this is one that I would see a couple of them in the competition section of their show. I think I have a really old video that's like competition at the Philadelphia Flower Show, which I'm sure it's a really crappy video, but I probably go through and show you like the plants that people enter in the competition, because people like local to the area will enter their houseplants in the show for people to just go and see, and I think they get like graded or ranked, or it's a competition. So it's really interesting to see what other people are growing around Philadelphia, which I think is my favorite part about the show. As cool as the displays are, and as much as I love shopping the booths, I really enjoy looking at the competition plants the most, certainly. So if you wanna go check out my old crappy video, I'm sure it only has like a couple thousand views. It's not probably the most exciting thing. But anyway, so this Sansevieria, it's called a walking Sansevieria. And so at the flower show, I would see a couple examples of these Sansevierias. And I wish I had photos. I don't think I have any photos, but you would literally see the Sansevieria, as you can see, it's kind of coming out of the pot right now, like it's almost like standing on its roots. And you can see right here, this is where a baby was cut off, I'm sure, by the seller. So the babies literally come up. Like they come up and out of the pot as if they're walking out of the pot and away from the mom. And it'll just be like up here. Like it'll just be this Sansevieria, but it's like up here, like 6 inches off the ground. And the roots will come back down into the pot, similar to how these are, but just much more exaggerated. It is just such a conversation piece. This alone just really looks like a samurai Sansevieria. Like it's not the most incredible houseplant, but it's just the character that it has once it gets growing. I'm sure you have to have it for a couple of years because it has to put off a baby, but I'm going to be over the moon when this thing finally puts off a baby. It's going to be so cool. I have it growing in my shelf right now because it's under a grow light. Obviously doesn't have a lot of height to it, but in a couple years time, if this thing really takes to my space, I'm sure I'm gonna have to get it out in the open and almost give it like a pedestal of its own so people could just enjoy it for all of its glory, as it really is just such a cool houseplant. This is not the specimen to do it justice, but in due time, we'll have a really nice one. But this is probably the one that costed me the most out of all of the houseplants I'm talking about today, and it still wasn't expensive. Like I think it was like $20, $25, $30 maximum. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but the character it has alone was just like the selling point for me. I was like, I'll pay anything to have this plant. As it is a Sansevieria or Dracaena, depending on how diehard you are. This is one that, of course, is very drought tolerant, but you do need to water it. I'm probably giving this water like every 2 weeks, as it isn't in a extremely high light situation, but if I did have this growing in like a west or south window, I'm sure I'd need to be watering it like every 7 to 10 days to ensure that these roots are hydrated enough. But this is one of the Sansevierias that I would definitely recommend growing in a bright setting. I know a lot of people will consider Sansevierias to be low light houseplants, but if you are working with a Sansevieria in low light, I would stick with the classic trifasciata, just the strappy leaves ones, as these ones that have much more thicker leaves are not going to look very good if they've been growing in a low light setting. Their new leaves are going to come in like pencil thin. It's not going to look good. So this is definitely a Sansevieria that you're going to want to give a higher light situation, but I think a grow light is perfectly fine. So that's it for today's video. I really hope that you guys learned about some new houseplants. I hope at least one of these is one that you haven't heard of before, but my goal was, if you have been collecting houseplants for a year or two and you're starting to see the same ones over and over again when you go into the houseplant stores, these are ones that are a little bit different, definitely harder to find, but like I said, not hard enough to find, and definitely on the inexpensive side, which is the most important thing to me. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Let me know in the comments any other plants, because there are obviously a lot of houseplants out there, and there are a whole bunch of them that nobody knows about. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.